Hey, so future-proofing. I thought, isn't that a pretty awkward word? That sounds like a man-made word. So I Googled it. Colin said, yeah, it's the art of preparing a product or system or people so that even if the future changes, it's still relevant. Now again, so I thought, there's got to be a better way to think about this. So I thought, future-proofing, where does the word come from maybe? So I thought, waterproof, right? When we say we want to waterproof something, what are we really saying about water? We're saying we don't want that water to land. We're saying we're scared of that water. Why are we scared of that water on our products? Yeah, that's safe in a bottle. We're scared of the water because we don't know when the water is going to come down, when we don't want it to. We don't know what form it's going to come down in. Is it going to come down as a rainpour or just some droplets? Droplets we can manage. But a typhoon like in the Philippines, oh, that's tough. And most importantly, we're not sure what the water is going to do to our products or ourselves when we're least prepared for it. If we think of that in terms of future-proofing, same thing. We're afraid of future. We talk about future, Industry 4.0, we're scared. We're scared because we don't know what this future is going to look like, when is it going to descend on us, when our robot's going to take over and think for us. We better program a kill switch. We are afraid of what it would do to us. Will we still have jobs? Will our grandkids be able to feed themselves and their children thereafter? But I think to focus on all that would be getting away from the point. Let's focus instead on what we know about ourselves and what we can do to influence this equation. All right? So I'm going to ask you to give me permission. I'm seated in front of, like I say, majority of you, 80% are from Asia Pacific or Berlin or / Germany. And you know what's the commonality amongst these two regions? We love our data, our facts, our statistics. We love our system structures and SOPs, right? Sorry, guys, I'm not going to be talking about any of that today because you can Google that and you will forget it, especially since it's after lunch. So I will be talking to you about stories and people instead. All right, so let's jump in. How many of you can read this? Pardon the bad resolution. Can someone read it out for me? And 温故知新, thank you, sir. Literally, right? Translated, it means to revise the old to know the new. To revise the old to know the new. That in its essence is originality. If you talk to inventors, you talk to people that created those characters in Jurassic Park, Game of Thrones, originality is not something that comes up from nowhere. It is by taking old things. The Jurassic Park guys, what he does is he takes different characters, he chops off the head from here, takes the arm from there, the leg from there, put it together and say, what new things can I come up with? And then he goes to sleep thinking about those weird stuff. So we are going to try and learn from some old and new experts and people and see how we can apply it. So the topic today really is future-proofing, but I'm going to focus on the individual because organizations are made of individuals. So let's talk about that. So in pedagogy and education, which is where I come from, we talk about simple frameworks. So today we'll talk about head, heart, and hand. Specifically head, hands, and heart to make sure we have our bases covered. Head. If you think to yourself, when was the last time that society had such far-sweeping change? I'm not talking about one area. Across the board, where people couldn't really keep a pace of things. The Renaissance, even more so than the Industrial Revolution was then, right? But you think of Da Vinci. Who was Da Vinci? We have to interact a bit, it's post-lunch. What comes to mind? He was a painter. He only painted about maybe at most 20 finished works at best. What else is he known for? He's an inventor, right? What else? Scientist, what else? What kind of scientist? A mighty scientist. I heard a monkey scientist, but almost, yeah? Mighty. What else was he? What else was he? He's a dreamer, great. What else is he? Or was he? What else was he? He was an inventor, right? He came up with things, the forerunner of the machine gun, the forerunner of the tanks, of course, Mona Lisa, Vitruvian Man, all of that. He taught himself all of this. And he didn't go, why am I drawing stuff? Why am I paying people to give me dead bodies when that's not my day job? Why am I looking at all these cells and carpal tunnels and vessels when that's not my day job? So what I'm trying to say is, guys, we need to think a bit more like Renaissance men and women so we can awaken ourselves and prepare ourselves for this new future. What this means is that we need to abandon some of our input-output mentality. You know, when your kids start drawing or they play with sand and you go, what are you going to do that for? Or they play a piece of pop music like Jay Cho on the piano, and the Asian parents go, look, are you going to make a living out of that? Back to your books. Right? It's time to abandon that mentality and experiment. So I'll give you 2 examples. Any one of you recognize this lady here? She's called Michelle Kine. So she's a PhD. And she focuses on something really weird called microfluidics. Now, for those of us like me who are not PhDs, it's the study of how fluids flow through microchannels in really small miniaturized devices. So Michelle had a problem. She had just moved to a new university. She hadn't gotten tenure yet, so she was fighting for a position. And she didn't have a clean lab. Clean labs take time and take multiples of millions of dollars to make. So Michelle had a problem. She had to prove herself. She had no clean lab, no money. And she thought, okay, then now I have to produce really small miniature devices. How many of you know it's harder to go small than to go big? Really hard. Do you know what she did? She decided to turn to her childhood. She sat there, she was like, okay, I'm stuck, what do I do? So instead of researching Google, instead of going to other PhDs and professors, she just dug down and she remembered this cartoon called Shrinky Dings. Any one of you mature enough to remember this from your childhood? Yeah, good stuff? Well, I don't, because, sorry sir, I'm not as mature as you. So I had to find this from online. But what this is really, you take something bigger, all you need is a toaster oven, and it shrinks. And when things shrink, the lines on it become pronounced, they pop up, so they become 3D. That's exactly how she created a lab. No clean lab, super cheap. For real, she used a toaster oven to create like microfluidic chips. And today, she's gotten tenure. She's an award-winning, well-published professor. So that's Michelle. Imagine if her childhood was only piano lessons, you know, abacus, mental lessons, tons of assessment workbooks, 10-year series. The Singaporeans here would know what I'm talking about. She would never have come up with this brainwave. So first, let's dare to explore and be curious, abandoning that short-term mentality. This lady here, she's called Sabrina. She's from Singapore, and she's the CEO of Skin Inc. What's special about her is that, like many of you, she came from a tech background. She used to work for IBM. She used to work for EMC Corp. Right? The interesting thing is, one day she decided to branch into skincare. She had this idea, okay, I'm going to customize skincare. I'm going to make all women do a skin check, and after they do that skin check, we'll have customized ingredients for them, as you can see here, putting it together. Now, then she had an issue. Her problem was that all of these unique materials, they had to be contained in capsules, active ingredients, and they couldn't be mixed beforehand. Otherwise, they would be cross-contaminated. So you know what she did? She sat there, she was thinking, okay, I need a way to make sure that they don't come together and contaminate one another. And she thought of this idea because she was going on a toilet break. She saw some glass jars, and then she also thought, well, I'm from a tech background. To protect really safe information, what do? We encrypt them. How can I encrypt the ingredients in these serums so that they remain active until they're exposed? And that's how she came up with seaweed capsules that only open upon contact. But the brainwave for that came from her tech background, encryption, protecting information, transferring that to something that seems completely unrelated, skincare and serums and hyaluronic acid. The challenge to us is then, as individuals, can we broaden our interests? After we broaden our interests, though, we need to spend time to think, when can this interest intersect and how? But don't be too quick to answer that question, because sometimes we don't know. How many of you have had brain waves before? You know, the longer you work on a problem, and the more you go down deep tunnel vision, the more stuck you are. You walk away, you play a game, online, offline, You play with your kids, you do sports, you even watch Netflix and binge for 7 seasons. And you get a brainwave, right? Yes? I'm not the only human here that likes to, escape sometimes. Right, so that was head. Think Da Vinci. Broaden our interest, experiment, dabble, and abandon that short-term mentality. For corporates, though, what that meant was really that corporates, you need to allow your people to play more. You need to allow for them to take coffee breaks, water cooler breaks, and not judge them. Judge them not on their process, just on their outcomes. It's easier said than done, I know. But I've lived through it, really. Allow them to just be this Da Vinci men and women. And like Da Vinci, it's a bit messy. Second thing is hands. Dare like Eleanor. Former First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt of the US, she said, do one thing every day that scares you. All right, since it's spring and it's nice and it's after lunch, I'll give you a discount. Do one thing every week that scares you. How many things, new things, scary things would you do by the end of the year? How many things? Mathematicians in the room. All right, some people are still awake after lunch. 52 new things. That's pretty impressive. Now, when I say new things, so this is part of keeping our muscles alive, right? So the World Economic Forum says the second most important skill that's growing for the future is active learning and learning strategies. You don't go to someone that has been in a comfort zone for 30 years and suddenly say, all right, learn something new. You don't go to someone that has only spoken one language for 50 years and say, now pick up 5 more languages. Not impossible, it's tougher though. So we have to keep those muscles alive. Any one of you have done gymnastics before or yoga, you know what I'm talking about. So one thing every week that scares you doesn't have to be big. It can be something as simple as go find the person that you're least likely to talk to at lunch, at tea break later, and talk to them, right? It could be, guys, let's navigate the roads without GPS. Get lost for a bit. Now I'm serious. Drive for a whole week without using GPS. Suddenly you'll start getting better with the roads, actually, right? Can you call people for a week instead of WhatsApping them if they're in the same country as you? Can you do these little things? Get lost in a bit. One thing that really just stretches, learn a new language, play a new instrument. Right? One question we want to ask ourselves is, am I feeling comfortable? Like that frog that's being cooked, and then before it knows it, it's being cooked alive. If you're feeling too comfortable, it's time to change. Just last week, I was chatting with a postgraduate student. He had been working 5 years as a teacher in a local school, geography. And then he said, okay, I'm going to take masters in wealth management. I said, why that? That's a huge change. He said, I realized that my life was easy. And that if I continued this way, very soon I would lose my capacity to stay flexible, to keep learning and being active. So really ask yourselves, are you being too comfortable? Do that one thing every week and end up with 52 things every year that scares you. Constraints are good for you. So set yourself constraints. You know those little challenges? Tell a friend, all right, for the whole of this week, I am going to set aside time where for 1 hour every day, I'm going to do nothing. I'm not going to touch my phone. I can only do offline stuff, right? And integrity. I'm going to put $100 with you. And every time I touch my phone, $10 goes out of it. Set yourself constraints because desperation is the mother of creativity. It really is. Now, I want to introduce this little concept too when it comes to hands, practically. Any one of you seen Dilbert cartoons? Yeah? He's funny because he has that boss that we kind of all relate to, which means that we are really bad bosses. So now, Scott Adams, the guy behind Dilbert, his cartoons, they're not rocket science. He's no Da Vinci for sure. He's not a particularly good cartoonist. He's not the best writer on earth, right? He is not the most corporate guy ever. He's not the funniest person ever either. But when you put all of this together, he's in a category of one. It's rare to find someone that can draw somewhat funny, has some knowledge of politics that people can identify with, right? And write decently well in fewer words than needed to fit into a concise column like that. So my question to you is, as you are tinkering like Da Vinci, What is your category of one as an individual? Maybe you are really, maybe you are not the best looking person. Maybe you're not the best speaker. You're not the best writer. You're not the best hands-on, maker-faire person. But can you put it together? Maybe you're not the best musician. But if you put it together, what might you be that causes you to stand out in a category of one? Because chances are robots are not very good at multitasking across creative and non-creative disciplines as well. Right? So same thing for companies. What is that category of one that you can play with? Okay, so I'm going to tell the story anyway, all right? So, Suits. I talked about Netflix earlier. So I want to recount this little story here. So she's Rachel, and you're never going to see her on screen acting anymore, because you know why. She's a mom, and she's royal now. But anyway, so in here, Rachel Zane, the character she was playing, she kept trying to take her LSATs. She kept failing. So she was dismayed. She was like, I'm never going to be a lawyer. Mike Ross, who has a crush on her, goes, I'll help you prepare for the LSATs. Right? So they get preparing. And Mike goes, okay, so what's the question to that? And she goes, A. And she goes, maybe B, D. And he was like, okay, final answer. She goes, okay, fine, D. The answer was A. Mike said, why didn't you go with A? You knew it was A was a gut instinct. She said, yeah, but, maybe I can't trust my gut. He says, well, you keep allowing yourself to get tricked by those questions. You get tricked fewer times than you actually get it right if you follow your gut, right? But if you keep avoiding, if you keep fearing getting tricked, then you're going to get the 130 instead of the 170 that you originally were going to get anyway if you had followed your gut. What this really means in the context of future-proofing and tinkering is, let's not be too afraid of tripping up. We will trip up. Okay, let's get that out of the way. We will trip up, we will fail. If we're not doing enough scary things, we're not tripping up, we're just too comfortable. We're not stretching enough. We're not experimenting enough. We're not being innovative enough. Right? So once you get that out of the way, like managers as well, if we keep getting trapped by wanting to minimize risk, wanting to manage costs, which are all important, we're going to stifle creativity. And this company, Adobe, they recognize that. So I'm sure some of you here know of Adobe Kickbox. Since 2015, super successful. It's $1,000, so you open the box, it says pull in case of idea. These teams come from everywhere around the organization. They could be front and back end, sales, admin, ops, marketing, right? Auditing, compliance, from across the organization. They get into these teams, no questions asked. In the box, Starbucks cards, Post-its, chocolate bars, and a prepaid $1,000 credit card. They can use it on anything. They don't have to pre-clear the ideas. There are 6 stages involved. The last stage is then pitching to senior management. Because what they realized was that oftentimes middle managers and senior managers, they kill an idea, but later on they realize those were exactly the ideas that the customers in the market want. As part of Adobe Kickbox, they have to do upwards of 100 user interviews to validate this process. Now you may say, how can we allow an idea to progress if we don't filter it a little bit at the start? Well, actually, if you think about it, let's say 20% of the ideas make it to Blue Box, where they develop something out of it. It's a very cheap way of seeding innovation. And for the other 80 that don't make it, you are actually creating a culture where people work together, you get ideas from everywhere in the organization, and people start talking, they start thinking, they start making innovation a culture, a way of life. Right? So how can you develop your own kickboxes everywhere within the organization? How they do this is that no matter who you are and how powerful your boss is, your boss cannot veto your idea. You are allowed to take the idea as far as you can go to the very end till you pitch to senior management. No questions asked. We need a bit of that latitude in our organizations today. Right? So that was the head, like Da Vinci, being curious. Then we keep our muscles active by tinkering and daring to do scary things, pushing ourselves out of that comfort zone. And finally, guys, we are human beings. That's one thing that robots can never take away from us. More than 20 years ago, when Deep Blue first beat Garry Kasparov in chess game, we should have known. In startup circles, we always tell our startups, focus on your competitive advantage. It would be foolish for us to keep focusing on being more productive, to be able to memorize more details, to be more efficient. Because guess what? That's robots and machines, their competitive advantage. What we have, though, is the ability to go, for example, Gary Kasparov, he could have said, okay, I'm hanging up my chess shoes. I can't memorize as many steps and new patterns as you, right? Deep Blue. But what I can do is maybe set up an academy. I can teach students to detect for themselves. For example, you're a great chess player, but you always choke up at that last moment because you're thinking too much. Gary can then use his empathy and emotional intelligence to coach people to overcome those barriers, overthinking, and fear of failure. He can maybe even coach parents to let go more of that pressure, that high-pressure coaching and helicopter parenting that hinders the performance of that chess player. Right? What can we do that we... Now, robots, they're not going to do that. They're going to say, well, you choke up, too bad. Next. There's going to be someone better. Robots are not going to empathize with disappointment, with joys, with failure, with exhilaration. That's exactly what we have as humans. And you know what? People always say change is the only constant. In my short life so far, I've noticed another constant, and that is that every time there's a new solution, there's a new set of problems. Right? Notice that? So now we have robots, and they've made our life a lot more efficient. We don't have to talk to anybody, but that's a problem. Loneliness is killing people, literally. And that's a problem because robots don't care about that until you make them care. That's a problem that only we as humans can solve. So in ending, I would can we just close our eyes for a moment? I'll read something poetic, and I want you to just feel it. You'll recognize it. Have you ever heard the wolf cry to the blue corn moon? Or asked the grinning bobcat why he grinned? Can you sing with all the voices of the mountain? Can you paint with all the colors of the wind? Can you paint with all the colors of the wind? I believe that if we are curious like Da Vinci, we continue to grow and to act in ways that keep our muscles active. And most importantly, we continue to feel with the eyes of our heart and paint with all the colors of the wind. We don't have to fear the future because we're going to be there to create it. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.